The day I lost everything was the day I realized I had been living someone else's life. It didn't happen all at once, but in a slow, agonizing unraveling, piece by piece. For years, I had put everything into making my life with him work. Him, my partner, the one I thought would always be there. We had built a life together, or so I thought. The house, the promises, the shared dreams of growing old together. It all seemed perfect from the outside. But perfection, like glass, can shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces if you look close enough. It wasn't the big moments that broke me. It was the small, subtle ones, the quiet betrayals, the unsaid words, the long silences. It was the way he began to stop seeing me, the way I became just another part of the background, no longer the woman I once was, no longer someone he admired or cared for. I thought I could fix it. I thought love, commitment, and hard work could fix anything. But I was wrong. And then came the day I discovered that it wasn't just emotional neglect. He had been lying to me, hiding things from me, things I didn't even know to look for. His betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the erosion of everything I believed in, the trust I had placed in him, the belief that we were building something solid, was a lie. A carefully crafted illusion that I had lived in for far too long. When I found out, it was as if the world had tilted on its axis. I stood there in shock, staring at the evidence of his betrayal, the truth unfolding before my eyes in a cold, unmistakable way. My hands shook, my heart pounded, but even through the anger and pain, something else stirred inside me, a deep, quiet rage, a burning desire to take control again. I had been deceived, manipulated, but that was no longer my story. In the moment when I felt the weight of everything crumble around me, I realized something. I had given so much of myself away in this relationship, so much of my time, my energy, my dreams, that I had lost sight of who I really was. I had allowed myself to be molded into a version of someone who wasn't me, and it was in that moment of clarity, in that deep well of hurt, that I made a choice. I would no longer allow this man, or anyone, control the narrative of my life. I would take back what was mine. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about trying to make him suffer for what he did. No, this was about me. It was about reclaiming my life. I had spent too long playing the part of the victim, of the one who needed saving. But the truth was, I had been saving him. I had been holding us together while he chipped away at me, little by little. Now it was my turn. I wasn't going to let this defeat me. I wasn't going to let his choices, his lies, define my life. I would rebuild, stronger than before, and I would do it on my own terms. He thought he could take everything from me, my trust, my love, my future. But what he didn't realize was that he had only given me the chance to rediscover who I truly was. And so, I began. It started with the hardest part, walking away. It wasn't just about leaving him behind, it was about leaving behind the version of myself that had been bound by fear, doubt, and insecurity. It was time for a rebirth. I was done being someone else's reflection. I was done hiding in the shadows of other people's expectations. I was going to step into the light, no matter how difficult the journey ahead seemed. I didn't know exactly what awaited me, but I knew one thing. It was my choice now. My life, my destiny, my future, finally in my hands. The road ahead would not be easy. It would be filled with challenges, with people who would try to pull me back into the life I had left behind, with doubts that would whisper in my ears, telling me to turn back. But I wasn't going to give up. I had been through too much to quit now. The pain of the past was still fresh, but it no longer had control over me. I had made a promise to myself that I would never again let anyone take away my power, my sense of self. I had been reborn, and this time I was going to take back my life, not just from him, but from the mistakes of the past, from the limitations I had placed on myself. I was going to build something more than just survival. I was going to build a life worth living, one where I could finally be free. Before I discovered the truth, before everything fell apart, I thought I had everything I could possibly want. I had a life that seemed ideal to others, comfortable, secure, the kind of life that people envied from the outside. I had the job, the relationship, the house. From the outside, it was a perfect little world, carefully constructed, meticulously curated. But in reality, I was living in a bubble, one I had built with my own hands, a bubble that had become my cage. I was raised to believe that happiness came from stability, to believe that if you worked hard enough, if you followed the rules, if you played it safe, then you could have everything you ever wanted. And for the longest time, I lived by those rules. I stayed in the safe lane. I kept my head down, did what was expected of me, and built a life that looked perfect on paper. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of who I was and what I really wanted. I had met Ethan years ago, during a time when I was searching for stability. He seemed like everything I needed. Kind, smart, successful. He was everything that looked good in a partner. He made me feel safe, secure, and in many ways, I thought he would be the person who would help me fulfill my dreams, the one I would grow old with, the one I would share my life with. At first, everything seemed perfect. We made plans for the future, talked about building a life together. I believed in him, believed in us, in the life we would create. We talked about our house, our careers, the children we would have. It was always we and our in the conversations, never me and my. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found my partner, someone I could share everything with. I thought that if I put my trust in him, if I dedicated myself fully to us, everything would work out. But it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. Little things at first, small shifts in his behavior that didn't sit right with me, the late nights at work that turned into weekends, the unexplained absences, the way he seemed to drift away emotionally. I began to ignore it at first, convincing myself that he was just busy, just stressed. But over time, the distance between us grew. He was physically there, but emotionally absent. I didn't want to admit it, but I was losing him. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way his words began to feel empty, rehearsed. And yet, I clung to the belief that I could fix it, that if I just worked harder, gave more, he would come back to me. I put in more effort. I cooked the meals he liked. I supported his career. I did everything I could to keep things running smoothly. But no matter how much I tried, it felt like he was slipping further away. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I was too afraid to confront it. What would happen if I did? What if the truth was more than I could bear? So I buried it. I pushed the doubts to the back of my mind, telling myself that I was just overthinking, that everything would be fine. But deep down, I knew the truth was starting to reveal itself. The first real crack in our relationship came when I found the messages. They weren't meant for me, but somehow they were exactly the words I had been trying to ignore. He had been texting her, someone from his office, someone he had been spending more and more time with. The messages weren't explicit, not at first, but they were enough to make me sick to my stomach. The affection in his words, the way he talked to her, the way he shared things with her that I thought were only meant for me, it all hit me like a tidal wave. I confronted him, though part of me already knew what the answer would be. His reaction was exactly what I had feared, defensive, apologetic, and full of excuses. He denied it at first, then admitted to it in the way someone admits to something they're trying to downplay. "It wasn't that serious," he said. "It was a mistake." He had made a mistake, but he loved me, and it wasn't about what I thought it was. He begged me to forgive him, to give him another chance, to forget what had happened. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't look at him the same way again. The trust we had built, the bond we had shared, was shattered in an instant. The foundation of our relationship crumbled, and there was nothing left but the wreckage. And in that moment, I realized something. The person I had been, the woman who had put everything into this relationship, was gone. I had given up pieces of myself to make this work. I had sacrificed parts of who I was to keep the peace, to maintain the image of the perfect life, and it hadn't worked. The truth hit me like a slap across the face. He didn't see me. Not really. He saw me as someone to be relied upon, someone to keep things together, but not someone to love, not someone to truly cherish. And in that realization, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this define me anymore. I wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, control my happiness. The woman who had been hiding in the background, who had been afraid to stand up for herself, was gone. The betrayal was painful, but it was also the wake-up call I needed. I had allowed myself to be diminished for far too long, to be a passive player in my own life. I had accepted his words, his apologies, without ever asking myself what I truly needed. I had sacrificed my own voice for the sake of this relationship, but no more. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when I was drowning in the hurt of being taken for granted. And that's when the decision was made. I couldn't stay in this life anymore. I couldn't continue pretending that everything was okay when I knew I was slowly suffocating. It was time for a change, time for me to stop playing the role of the dutiful partner and start living for myself. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this betrayal destroy me. I was going to take back my life. I was going to rise from the ashes and rebuild. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. The days following my decision to change were the hardest I had ever faced. I had already made the choice to walk away, to rebuild my life, but the true work was just beginning. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wanted to retreat into the familiar, when the weight of uncertainty became unbearable. But I knew deep down that I could never go back. The choice I had made was for me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that truly belonged to me. I began with the basics, the immediate steps I needed to take. I had to leave the apartment that had once felt like home, but had now become a prison. It was strange how quickly something that had felt like a sanctuary could turn into a place of suffocating memories. The walls seemed to echo with the laughter we used to share, the conversations we used to have. But that version of my life was gone. I had to separate myself from the man who had once been everything to me. I couldn't afford to look back. I spent hours packing my things, sorting through the remnants of my past. The items in the apartment were a constant reminder of the life I had built with Ethan, but they also held traces of my former self, the woman who had thought she was content, who had believed in a love that was destined to last. It wasn't easy to let go of those things, but I knew that in order to move forward, I had to let go of the attachments to the past. As I filled the boxes with clothes, books, and photographs, I realized how much I had allowed myself to be defined by the relationship, by the house we had shared, by the life we had built. It was time to reclaim my own identity, to build a future that was all mine. The hardest part, though, wasn't just packing up my things or leaving the apartment. It was confronting the parts of myself I had neglected. The woman who had been so focused on keeping things together for Ethan, on making sure he was happy, on making sure our life looked perfect from the outside. That woman was gone, but she had left pieces of herself scattered around, pieces I needed to rediscover. I spent hours reflecting on what had brought me to this point. What had I wanted all along? What had I sacrificed? It wasn't just my identity that had been lost in this relationship. It was my dreams, my ambitions, the things I once loved but had abandoned. I had put everything into someone else's idea of happiness, but I realized that in doing so, I had lost touch with the things that had once mattered most to me. I remembered my love for writing, how I had always dreamed of publishing a book, of sharing my stories with the world. But somewhere along the way, I had put those dreams on hold. I had buried them under the weight of responsibility, under the pressure of making sure everything in my life was perfect. But now, I was finally ready to let those dreams breathe again. I took out the old notebooks I had kept hidden in a drawer, filled with scribbled ideas, half-finished stories, and poems I had never dared to show anyone. I opened the pages, and for the first time in years, I felt the spark of excitement. Writing was no longer something I had to do, it was something I wanted to do. I wasn't going to let my past mistakes dictate what I could or couldn't achieve. I was going to write, and I was going to make my voice heard. Next, I focused on rebuilding my social circle. Over the years, I had let go of friendships, choosing to focus entirely on Ethan and our relationship. But now I realized how much I had sacrificed in the name of love. I had neglected the people who had once been my closest allies, the friends who had supported me through the ups and downs of life. I reached out to a few of them, sending messages, making calls, asking if we could reconnect. The response was warmer than I had anticipated. Some of them had known what was happening but hadn't known how to help. Others had simply faded away, not understanding the isolation I had felt. But now, as I reconnected with them, I began to feel the strength of these relationships again, the support and care that had always been there, but that I had pushed away. I also started taking care of myself in ways I hadn't in years. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to try but had never had time for. The first few sessions were difficult. My body was stiff, my muscles sore from years of neglect. But with every session, I felt myself getting stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. Yoga was not just about flexibility, it was about learning to be present, about reconnecting with myself. I spent hours at the park, walking, breathing in the fresh air, rediscovering the peace I had lost. I began to eat healthier, to nourish my body with the care it deserved. For the first time in years, I wasn't focused on making someone else happy. I was focused on myself, on my growth, on my healing. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to throw in the towel, when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But every time I took a step forward, I felt the weight of my past lifting, little by little. Every time I sat down to write, every time I reconnected with an old friend, every time I made a choice that was just for me, I felt the fire inside me growing stronger. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something new, something real, something I could be proud of. And through all of this, I learned something important. I had the power to shape my own future. I didn't need anyone else's permission. I didn't need anyone else's approval. This was my life, and I was the one in control. The more I began to rebuild my life, the more I realized that this was only the beginning. I was no longer the woman who had been afraid to take risks, to stand up for herself, to make choices that were true to who she was. I was stronger, braver, and more determined than I had ever been. And I wasn't about to stop now. The life I had once shared with Ethan was gone, but it was only the start of the life I was now building. And this time, it was going to be on my terms. I was no longer the person who was defined by someone else's choices. I was the person who made her own destiny, and no one could take that away from me. As I began to make strides in reclaiming my life, I soon realized that the journey forward wasn't going to be as simple as just taking steps toward independence. The world around me, my family, friends, even some of my colleagues, didn't quite understand why I had chosen this path. They didn't see the emotional damage I had suffered, the deep toll Ethan's betrayal had taken on me. To them, I was simply someone who had walked away from a good life, someone who had given up on love and security for the sake of some ill-defined freedom. It started with my family. At first, they rallied around me, telling me I had done the right thing by leaving. They were sympathetic and supportive, offering me a shoulder to cry on, reassuring me that everything would be okay. But as the weeks went on and I focused on rebuilding, something shifted. The conversations became more about getting back out there, about finding someone new, about how I couldn't stay in this place of pain forever. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate their concern, but they didn't see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about moving on from Ethan. It was about me reclaiming my own identity, my own life. And the more they tried to push me back into the world of dating, the more I realized how little they understood. One evening, my mother, in her usual well-meaning but misguided way, brought up the idea of matchmaking again. "You need to start thinking about your future, honey. You're not getting any younger. You can't let what happened with Ethan keep you from finding happiness. You deserve someone who will treat you right." I could hear the love in her voice, but all I felt was frustration. "I don't need someone else to define my future, Mom," I said, my voice firm but calm. "I've spent my whole life building my identity around other people's expectations. I can't do that anymore. I'm not looking for a new relationship. I'm looking for me." Her eyes widened with surprise, the words seemingly too foreign for her to process. "But you can't just hide forever? You're stronger than that." I didn't hide. I wasn't hiding. I was building something real, something that came from within, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how much they loved me, take that away. I was determined to stay on the path I had chosen, but every time I encountered that kind of reaction, I felt the weight of their judgment pressing in on me. It wasn't just my family. The pressure also came from my friends. Some of them understood, but others didn't. Claire, one of my oldest friends, confronted me one afternoon at the coffee shop. I had always trusted her, but as I saw her frustration building, I realized that she didn't understand my decision. "Do you ever think maybe you're overreacting? I mean, I get it. Ethan messed up. But this whole reclaiming your life thing? It's extreme," she said, her voice tight with concern. "You're pushing people away. Maybe it's time to stop living in the past." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm not living in the past, Claire. I'm learning from it. I'm moving forward in a way that works for me. I'm not going to just pretend everything is okay when it isn't." She sighed, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's just too much. You need to let it go." But I wasn't letting anything go. I was shedding the parts of myself I had lost, shedding the parts that had been compromised for someone else's comfort, for a life that wasn't mine to begin with. The woman I was becoming was someone who refused to apologize for her strength, for her choices. And that strength was going to be tested again. The most difficult confrontation came when Ethan reappeared in my life. It wasn't unexpected. I had known that eventually he would try to reach out, try to apologize, try to make things right. What I hadn't expected was how deeply it would affect me. It happened one evening. I was at my new apartment, working on an article for a freelance project when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find him standing there, looking almost like the man I had once known, except this version of him was smaller, diminished by guilt, regret, and time. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but there was a sense of urgency about him, like he needed to fix something before it was too late. "I know you don't want to see me," he began, his voice tentative, as though unsure of what to say next. But I can't live with myself if I don't apologize. I know I hurt you, and I never wanted to. I cut him off before he could continue. Ethan, I've already forgiven you. But that doesn't mean we can go back. You can't fix what's broken by offering an apology. You can't fix me. His face fell as though my words had physically wounded him. But we had so much together. I don't understand why you're doing this. Why can't we just move on? Because moving on doesn't mean forgetting the past, I replied, my voice steady but firm. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Ethan. I'm asking you to accept that this is where our paths diverge. I've learned that the only way forward is on my own. I'm done living for someone else. I'm choosing myself. For a moment, there was silence. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the shock, the realization that I had truly moved on. But I wasn't looking for redemption from him. I wasn't seeking closure or any kind of emotional validation. I had already given that to myself. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said softly, but it won't be with me. He didn't respond, and I watched as he walked away, disappearing into the distance. As the door closed behind me, I let out a long, shaky breath. I had stood my ground. I had let go completely. But as the days went by, I realized something even more important. Ethan's presence, his apology, was no longer the weight I carried. I had been carrying the emotional baggage of our past relationship for far too long, and now that it was gone, I felt lighter. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned my decisions, but those moments were fleeting. With every step I took toward healing, toward my own future, the past seemed less and less like a burden. The tension was still there, from my family, from some of my friends, from the world around me, but now it felt more like a whisper, a distant echo of the woman I had been. And as I began to embrace my new life, the truth became clear. I had nothing to prove to anyone, not to Ethan, not to my family, not to the people who doubted me. The life I was building was for me, and that was enough. The days that followed my confrontation with Ethan were not as dramatic as I expected. There were no explosive emotional moments, no climactic battles where we would face off one last time. Instead, the real change came quietly, steadily, and from within. I had made my decision to move forward, to take control of my life, and the world around me slowly began to shift. It wasn't the world that changed, though. It was me. I was no longer the woman who sought approval, who craved validation. I was no longer the woman tethered to someone else's choices. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, and nothing could take that from me. The first sign of change came when I landed my first freelance writing contract. It wasn't much at first, a few small articles, a couple of blog posts, but it was everything I needed. It was validation, not from anyone else, but from myself. It was proof that I could build something from the ground up, that I wasn't reliant on anyone else for success. I was doing something I loved, something that mattered to me, and that feeling of accomplishment was worth more than anything I had ever achieved in the past. I threw myself into my work, not out of necessity, but because I had finally rediscovered the passion that had once burned inside me. Every project I took on, every article I wrote, felt like a victory, a step further away from the life I had left behind, and a step closer to the life I was creating. Writing had always been my first love, something I had pushed aside for years, but now it was my career, my lifeline, my means of self-expression. And it was mine, wholly and completely. But it wasn't just in my career where I saw growth. As I settled into this new life, I realized that the relationships I had with people, old friends, new acquaintances, were changing too. The people who had genuinely supported me through this journey, who had understood the importance of my transformation, were the ones who stayed. The others, the ones who had wanted me to stay the same, to fit into the old life I had built with Ethan, drifted away. And that was okay. I had learned that not everyone would understand my journey, not everyone would see the value in the path I had chosen, and I had to be okay with that. One afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from my sister, someone I had been close to in the past but had distanced myself from during my relationship with Ethan. She had always been supportive, but there had been moments when I had shut her out, when I had believed that I couldn't burden her with my struggles. But now, as I listened to her voice on the other end of the line, I realized how much I had missed her. "I've been hearing about everything you've been doing, and I just wanted to check in," she said, her tone warm, filled with care. "I'm proud of you. I can tell you're really finding your way." I felt a lump form in my throat. For so long, I had convinced myself that I was alone, that I was the only one who understood the pain I was going through. But in that moment, I realized how wrong I had been. My sister had always been there, always ready to support me. And now, I had opened myself up to receiving that support again, to rebuilding the relationships I had neglected in the pursuit of someone else's idea of happiness. "I've missed you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I've missed us." From that moment on, I worked on reconnecting with the people who had always had my back. I reached out to old friends, family members, anyone who had been there for me before I lost myself in my relationship. I didn't just want to rebuild my career, I wanted to rebuild my life, my sense of community. I wanted to surround myself with people who would help me grow, who would support my independence, and who would respect the woman I had become. The real test, though, came when I finally felt ready to take the next step in my journey, leaving behind the physical remnants of the life I had with Ethan. The house that we had shared was still there, sitting empty, waiting for me to make a decision about what to do with it. I had been unsure for months, torn between holding on to it as a symbol of stability and moving on to something completely new. But when I stepped inside one last time, I knew what I had to do. The house no longer felt like home. It was just a building, a collection of walls and rooms that had once been filled with laughter and promises, but now felt cold and empty. I didn't need it anymore. The memories, the hope of what could have been, were holding me back. I made the decision to sell it, to let go of the physical reminder of the life I had lost. The sale wasn't just about getting rid of material things. It was about shedding the emotional baggage that had been attached to that house. It was about making room for new beginnings, for new memories. It wasn't easy, but as I signed the papers and handed over the keys, I felt a sense of liberation. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long had lifted. I was free. But the greatest change of all came when I realized something profound. I had taken back my life, not just from Ethan, but from myself. For so long, I had allowed my choices to be shaped by others, by my family's expectations, by Ethan's desires, by society's definition of success. But now, I was living for me. And that was the most powerful realization of all. As I looked at the life I had built, my career, my relationships, my inner peace, I knew that I had earned this. This wasn't just luck. This was the result of hard work, of standing up for myself, of refusing to let anyone, not even myself, keep me from the life I deserved. I had reclaimed my power, my voice, and my sense of self. I wasn't the woman who had been broken by betrayal anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been defined by someone else's actions. I was the woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. I had built something that no one could take from me, and in that, I had found my true strength. It's been over a year since I made the choice to change my life, to walk away from everything I thought defined me. And now, as I sit here, reflecting on how far I've come, I find myself amazed at the woman I've become. The person I was when I first walked away from Ethan, from the life I thought I wanted, feels so distant, so foreign, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the distance between her and who I am now. What I've come to realize is that true freedom doesn't come from escaping the past, it comes from accepting it. I don't regret the years I spent with Ethan. I don't regret the lessons I learned, even though they came through pain. Those experiences have shaped me, yes, but they no longer control me. I've taken what I needed from them, the lessons that helped me grow, and I've left behind the baggage. I've learned to make peace with my past, not because it was perfect, but because I've finally understood that my worth was never tied to someone else's actions. It was always within me, waiting to be discovered. Over the past year, I've built something for myself that I never thought possible. I've found a new career, one that challenges me, excites me, and pushes me to grow every single day. I'm not just working a job, I'm living my passion. I've written articles that I'm proud of, and I've shared my stories with the world. Stories I never would have shared if I had stayed trapped in a life that wasn't meant for me. Writing has become more than just a career. It's a lifeline. It's the means through which I rediscovered who I am, the tool that has allowed me to heal, to speak my truth, and to create a future I can be proud of. But the work I've done on myself, the work that has transformed my life, isn't just about my career. It's about how I see myself, how I value myself. The woman who once sought validation from others, who put her dreams on hold to support someone else's vision of happiness, is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who understands that her happiness doesn't come from the approval of others, it comes from within. I've learned that I am enough, exactly as I am, and that's something I had to learn to believe. I've also made peace with the people in my life. I've rekindled old friendships, and the relationships I have now are based on mutual respect, support, and honesty. I've surrounded myself with people who lift me up, who see me for who I truly am, and who respect the journey I've taken. There's no more pretending, no more hiding. I don't have to be anyone other than myself, and the people I've chosen to let into my life respect that. That's the most freeing part of all of this. I no longer feel the need to wear a mask, to be someone I'm not, to play a role for the sake of others. And then there's love. The kind of love I never thought I'd experience again, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I never imagined it could be so different. It's not the kind of love I had with Ethan, full of false promises and unspoken resentments. It's a love rooted in respect, in equality, in two people coming together to build something strong and lasting. It's the kind of love where both people are whole on their own, and they choose each other not out of need, but out of desire, to grow together, to support each other, to push each other to be the best versions of themselves. It's a love that complements, not completes, and that's what makes it so powerful. I've learned that love, true love, doesn't require sacrifice at the expense of your own happiness. It doesn't ask you to lose yourself in someone else. It allows you to be who you are, and it helps you grow into who you're meant to be. The love I have now isn't perfect, but it's real. It's the kind of love I've learned to give myself first, before I give it to anyone else. And that, I believe, is the foundation of all healthy relationships. It starts with self-love, with knowing that you are deserving of everything good that comes your way. Looking at the life I've built, I am in awe of the strength I've found. The woman who once believed she wasn't worthy of success, of happiness, of love, is now living a life that exceeds anything she ever imagined. I've built my career, rekindled my friendships, discovered a love for myself, and found a love that truly honors who I am. I've found peace in the chaos, strength in the struggle, and purpose in the pain. And as I look to the future, I know that I will continue to grow, to evolve, and to create a life that is aligned with my truest self. The journey I've taken has been long and difficult, but it has been worth every step. I've learned that the only person I need to be is myself, and I've learned that my life is mine to shape. I am no longer afraid of the future. I am excited for what lies ahead, because I know I can handle anything that comes my way. So, to anyone who feels trapped, anyone who believes they are stuck in a life that isn't meant for them, know this. You have the power to change. You have the strength to walk away from what holds you back, and you have the ability to build something better. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. I've done it, and I know you can too. The life I have now is one I built from the ground up, one that reflects who I truly am, and I will continue to live it on my terms. I'm not looking back anymore. I'm moving forward, stronger and more determined than ever, ready for whatever the future holds. Because I know that no matter what happens, I will always have the most important thing of all, myself.